Hi, I'm Alan.
And I'm Mark. As developers of conversational apps that inform and assist, we speak out in support of a peaceful resolution to the aggression in Ukraine.
The voice community has connected us to designers and developers around the world. If you're able to donate to help Ukraine, find a charity that speaks to you or consider donating with Voice Lunch.
May dialogue and democracy be the preferred tools of peace.
Our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. In this episode, we reference the work of some of the voice community members that are in Ukraine right now. Our thoughts are especially with them and with their families. Hey there, I'm Alan Furstenberg.
And I'm Mark Tucker, and we are two voice devs.
Two voice devs. So we kind of ended in the middle of a conversation last week, Mark.
We did. I knew it was going to go long. Our favorite topic of voice content management systems.
Definitely a great topic, and one that I'm sure we can keep talking about. So let's pick up where we left off last week.
Sounds good. Let's go.
I think my perspective of a content management system focused around taking the bundle of context and finding a reply is largely shaped by what I'm doing with multivocal.
Right.
Because that's how multivocal works. The reason why I don't see multivocal as a CMS right now is there's no way to manage that content.
There is no UI, and there's the other things that we talked about the workflow and the publication side of things. It's you update the data and it's immediately available, right?
Right. I could easily see somebody building a UI on top of it that gives that. I could, and there have been cases where I've built custom adapters, so somebody wanted to enter all of this stuff into a spreadsheet, and that's fine. I could read it out of a spreadsheet into a format that multivocal could handle. But how do you then take it up another notch so that it's comfortable and flexible and lets you do things like say, only do this for, the first 5 times and only do this for the, multivocal has that concept in it, but how do you present that in a UI?
Yeah. How do you make that?
And how do you tweak that?
Exactly. And then on the back end, you don't want to have to rewrite this whole system for a Google Action versus an Alexa skill versus a chat bot versus a Facebook Messenger app or Discord bot or so you could build the system like WordPress on something like Jovo that already has this concept of you get in a request and we'll tell you, depending on what the request is, we'll know where it came from and we'll do stuff, and then we'll make sure that the response gets formatted on the output to match what needs to be returned back for that particular system. So that could be like a good overall system, and then you could write plugins and other things that would then fit into that system. But really having a UI to manage that whole thing would make it a lot easier.
Definitely, and I think also it lets you, I could easily see it so that you would do things like create, a HTML template to use on the interactive canvas and an APL template to use on Alexa, and the system would know which one it should be returning. And you then specify specific parameters like, I'm going to need this information displayed in field A. And it knows that means an APL, it needs to put it as part of a data component, and on interactive canvas, it needs to present it, this other different way.
Yeah. Or that could even be like, you've got something some definition in your context, and both of the screens are based off of that context.
Exactly.
But then you need to have some sort of transformer inside of there and that could be a separate, screen in your UI. Like when you hit this point, you're going to get this data. This is what the JSON input is going to look like. And this is what you want the JSON output to be to match up things to different fields. And then that's just kind of part of the configuration of the system.
Right. And, actually, you just raised an issue there as well, is that, there are certainly things that aren't quite response, but are certainly part of system configuration that you want to tweak somewhere.
Yeah.
So whether that's what voice you want it to respond with.
Correct. It's part of the formatting.
Right. It's part of the formatting, or even, what's the max, if we're returning a list of stuff, what's the maximum number of things that I want to return in a list?
Right.
You may want to start that out at 4, but if they've determined that 3 might be better, you don't want to have to go back to the developer and say, change that down to 3.
Yeah, and it could be varied. Like, what do you want to say versus what do you want to show on the screen?
And
do you want to say do you want to say 3 but show 20? Do you want to,
Very good point. Yeah. And again, you want to empower the content people to make that determination as much as possible.
Yeah. No, we've talked about content kind of in the generic sense, and so there's lots of content management systems out there. There are some that are more, I guess, full-fledged, something like a WordPress, but there's also something out there called headless content management systems, meaning that they don't necessarily have a UI themselves to deal with them like WordPress does, but you can get to them via APIs, which means that you could write your own UI to call the APIs and create workflows and whatever you want to in the content management system. So, some of the ones that I've used before is sanity.io, and there's one called Graph CMS. There's lots and lots of them. You can Contentful. I don't know what all of them are, but you can definitely search for headless CMS and get an idea of what's out there.
No,
but those aren't specifically voice specific. So it'd be interesting to kind of consider what to do. I'm not very familiar
with these. Do they just provide the API, or do they provide like a basic way that you can enter in key value pairs, for example?
So it kind of depends. Like, for example, sanity.io has an API and a data store. It's a service. So you're going to pay X number of dollars a month to host your content in this content management system.
Okay.
But there is a sample project that, in essence, with some configuration file changes, it will generate a website, which you can then actually go in and edit the content. So this is exactly what I did for Number Spies.
Okay.
I had things like, I wanted to create a mission. I wanted to create locations. I wanted to post things in the future. So I could give definition to a location looks like this. These are the fields. It's related to this other thing that is a code or so I could define those entities or those items or objects inside of this configuration file. And then when I ran the website, I could run it locally, which is what I did. But there's no reason why you couldn't turn around and host that somewhere. And then all of a sudden now you've got a hosted website, which is custom to the content that you're creating. You can manage that.
And again, to be clear, when we say hosted a custom website in this case, it's really a website that's meant for a very narrow audience, right?
Yes, those that are
right.
updating the content for this specific application.
Right. So, and I make that distinction as opposed to like the WordPress website, which is meant for, which serves two purposes. One is for the people who are creating the content and for the people who are consuming the content. This is a case where the website that you just created is really just for the creators.
Right. But you can specify the content and you're like, this content or the same content I'm going to use for mobile or web or whatever the thing is. And so if you think of those as different channels that are going to be served, voice would just be another one of those.
Yeah.
And we gave the example earlier of images being formatted based on what type of device. Well, one of the problems that we have to solve in voice is that the SSML is different based on which device it is, or if it supports SSML at all, right?
But we've solved that already with speech markdown. So
yeah, and that was the intent of speech markdown, was to try to say, if I could create this simplified format for defining this formatting of speech output, then we could take that and determine, oh, I am on an Alexa device, so the output is going to be formatted so it works for Alexa. And the same thing with Google Actions or Bixby or whatever else it is. So there are ways to solve that, but that is something that would make a kind of more general or generic content management system be more specific. You might do very well with just using a general purpose content management system, but there are some special needs that voice has that these other ones don't have, because they don't really think about that realm. But they could, right?
No, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. Is that a user interface that is tailored for voice would let you enter an SSML and then hear what it sounds like.
Exactly.
So you could, tweak, so this gives you an SSML editor that lets you tweak things around. Or as you said, create something that you enter in both the SSML and the visual response. So you can see side by side what they're going to look like and sound like.
Right. And then you could tweak like, oh, this isn't pronouncing this word correctly, so I'm going to go right into the IPA for that, and I'm going to tell you exactly how to say it.
Or here's what it's going to sound like on Google, and here's what it's going to sound like on Alexa, and I'm going to need to either serve up a different one for each or tweak it a little bit or something. Yeah.
Or you're like, I want to use Polly as a Polly voice as one of my output, so I want everything to always go through some text-to-speech engine to generate the audio file based on what it is. But maybe I want to plug it in. Maybe I've got some other provider out there, or maybe I've got a custom like a voice actor that has created a brand new text-to-speech voice for my needs, for my interactive story.
And I'm using one of the services that will do the text to speech, or that I've got recordings for all of my output for.
Right. Well, then it's like, well, I've got this text. Here's all of my script. Like if you're thinking of like a screenplay or something, like, well, here's my script in English, but I want that side by side with my script in German or Spanish or whatever else. And so now there's this whole, like, I want to be able to manage translations, and I want to be able to, tweak things based on where you're at.
Like I keep saying, it's all context. Maybe I'm just stuck in this mode of thinking, but to me, it really just seems like I have a billion parameters, and I need a system that lets me control what's going to happen when any one of those billion parameters changes.
Yeah, because I think we're both so excited about this.
No, yes, it's exactly what I am excited about this, because I can easily imagine a system where I can just turn it over to somebody and say, and if you want to have different output for the morning versus evening, you click this box and it'll show you the morning and evening ones instead. And if you want to see the English, German, and Italian, click the German and Italian, and it'll show it to you in 3 columns. And
yeah,
I can picture those sorts of systems.
Yeah, I can see that. So on the content editing side of things, or like, I'm going to start with a brand new language. I'm going to start off with English, and now I'm going to start filling. These are all the things that I have to translate. So now I've translated those. Okay, maybe now I want to bundle that file off to some place that's going to have a voice actor do all the audio files for each of those sections. And when I come back, I want to be able to match up the names of the audio files with this particular content, and have that just be part of the system. And there could be versions of those, right? For this response in English, I might have 5 different ways that I'm going to reply, but in German, I only have 2 or 3 different ways to reply. So they're not literal translations, but they're getting. But so for English, I want you to pick one of the 5, and in German, pick one of the 3.
How do we
So then
manage
it's
that?
so then the simulator that you're talking about, that like, hey, I want to test the system. It's not only testing the conversation flow, but it's like, okay, at this step in time, let me hear all 5 of those responses. Just iterate through each of those and let me hear those off. Oh, I want to tweak this one, or I want to add another one. Okay, let's listen to that. Okay, that's good. Let's move on. But then you would have to surface all of these flags and potential values, drop down lists of values and things, and like, if I am in the morning on a weekend and,
Well, but some of it also is, some languages have their responses are gendered. So you
Yep.
need to have these multiple ways of doing,
Yeah.
and they're gendered possibly based on other pieces of input that we have. So, it's I think the problem when it comes to conversation, when it comes to coming up with a response, is it's easy to just come up with a single response.
Yeah. And I think typical content management systems do, if A, then B.
Right. But the problem with that when it comes to conversations is that that gets boring really quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real, usability issue. And so we need some way to create that complexity and manage that complexity, because it creates better conversations.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, much better conversations. So, I think that's where CMSs need to go, is we need to be able to create those more complicated responses, but make it easy for people who are not programmers to create.
Yeah. And we have to do it in a way that you don't have to recreate everything. Like, oh, this is my project for Alexa. This is, project A, right. Alexa, project A, Google Assistant. And I have to recreate this whole thing, because that's
right. That's unmanageable. It's unmanageable with just 2, but when you start talking chatbots and other, we also want to incorporate a web system, it really does get unmanageable. And that's why I know I keep coming back to this. That's why, to me, the system that you're using is just part of the context. Just like right now, the browser that you're using is just part of the context.
Just part of the context. Yep. And it's just one of many things. And you can decide that you want 2 different responses, visually and voice based on this platform, or not. Maybe it's a simple text response and it's the exact same thing regardless of which
but
which platform it is.
Anyway, that's why I'm so excited about CMSs. Is I think the ones that are coming out now, the one from Leximic, for example, it's a great start. It's clearly identifying that there are specific needs for voice, and they're going to start building a system that is tailored around those needs. So, they've got the SSML preview feature coming. I think it's great that they're doing it, but there's so much more that I want these systems to do.
And it's interesting because you talked about this before, is that the intent is different than the response.
The response, yeah.
And it's not always a one-to-one. You could be, you could have the text, which is the response, and then the conversation ends. So all you need is that text. You could have the text with a prompt and then a reprompt if they don't respond in a certain amount of time, and to continue with the conversation.
Well, but it's also, I mean, it's in addition to that, but it's also things like, if I'm in a weather skill or action and I've just asked for the weather at a certain location. Well, if I don't know that location, I need to give you back a response that's an error response.
Yeah.
As opposed to giving you back the weather, which is a totally different thing.
Yeah.
There are cases where, and again, this is why I see the intent as part of the context.
Yeah. So don't have the response be based on the intent. Right. Have the response be based on a condition, one of those conditions being the intent.
Right. And this is something, that multivocal does okay. One of the things I like about multivocal is that I created this concept of an outtent. The intent is what comes in. The outtent specifies what's going out. And you can set the outtent. So, in most cases, you're going to be making a decision based on the intent or the handler. But in a couple of cases, you want to be able to say, no, use this set of phrases instead.
Yeah.
And it gives you the ability to set those phrases. And then as part of your logic, you set that.
Right. But even if we just take the, well, I do agree with what you're saying, but to continue on with something I had said a little bit earlier was there's the message that you say, and then there's usually the prompt, and then there's the reprompt.
Yes.
But the message could be pieced together based on a flow that's like this intro, which is randomly selected from 10 intro things that have one placeholder in it for the person's name or something. Then you do some logic and you're like, oh, this condition turned out to be this thing. So now add this sentence versus this other sentence. So even building that one text, that message that's coming back, even if you ignore the prompt and the reprompt part, it could be based on a flow that includes 2 API calls and some other context. I know in the end, an API call response is still just going to add to the context. It's just adding data to the context. But that flow, the thing that you build up it could be made up of multiple sentences that are determined based on different context to then come up with the whole response that's going to be returned back. So it's not really a hard-coded this, then that. So the content that you put in the system could be the whole response, or it could just be sentences that are conditionally placed in based on context.
Or both. I mean, one of the things that I think about is that, in some ways, if we think about this in terms of our web page again, we've got a web page that may be made up of a bunch of different blocks.
Yep.
And each of those blocks we can now configure independently to say what its content is going to be. So in the same way, we could say a response might have an introduction, a list of data, and a summary. And then we define, 10 possible things for the introduction. The list of content maybe 2 or 3 because it's narrower, if it's just one thing that we're returning versus if it's 3 things we're returning, and then a summary to tell you how many, and each of those would be templates,
right?
So I very much think of this in terms of templates made out of that reference other templates.
And it could be conditional templates too, like include this template or not include this template.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful way to think about it. And again, I want the CMS system to be that templating system as well, because I, as a developer, shouldn't need to deal with that too much.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll deal with it to the extent of I define a few templates in the custom CMS part of the system, or maybe not.
Yeah. And if you could then, the more that you can move code outside of the thing that's taking in the request and returning back the response, then you have this template, which is a plugin which takes in the context, determines what the template's going to be, adds that to the context, which then later on is like, so I'm asking for what is my current order. So I do an API call and I put my current order in context. That's what that widget does. The logic lives, it's a very small component that just does that piece. And then it moves on to the next part of the conversation flow. And it says, oh, I need to tell you what that order is. Here are the values that I have. Oh, I need to transform it for Alexa APL because I'm using a certain template in APL that requires certain things. But yeah,
in APL, I'm going to show you that list, and I can't do that on the Google side. Or I know you just have a smart speaker, so I'm going to read some stuff off to you as opposed to show it to you on the screen.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to build this.
I know that would be so much fun.
And to be fair, this is exactly where I'm going with multivocal, and I think it's where, you know, you see some of the template concepts in Jovo are doing this sort of thing, and I think some of the logic stuff that we're seeing in VoiceFlow are doing this, you know, beginning to have some of the front end part of it, but nothing's putting it all together yet.
Yeah, it would be a pretty exciting system once that, you know, you're really, the customizations that coders are doing are with some very well-defined inputs and outputs, and it's just this API call and formatting, or just this, and so then that just gets plugged into the system, and you know, the designer gets to flow things out and determine what's going to get responded back based on conditions that are in the context. I think that's I think it makes a lot of sense to me that you can move more and more of the stuff out into a system where everything is coded, or the branching's coded, or things like that.
I would love to hear what other people think about, you know, what they'd want to see in the CMS and what they'd want to see on the developer side, and, you know, how much of the CMS can be controlled by the conversation designer and how much by the content designer or the content creator. I'd love to hear other people's perspectives on that, because I think this is a really, really important tool that we're going to need to get voice out there in the same way that we have WordPress sites out there.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you can move more of that into what would start as a hobbyist, or what would start as, you know, I've got content that I want to give out to a certain audience, and that's what they're worrying about, but give them the flexibility of you know, crafting not just the words and the strings, but, you know, how it flows together and how it varies and stuff. I think that would be a lot of power.
I think so too.
In a system.
Love to hear people's thoughts on this. You know, give us the feedback. This one, I think, more than a lot of our other topics, we really, really want to be a good conversation, so to speak. Because I really think this is an important tool, and I really want to see it built and help people build it.
Yeah, so, and you know, we've been thinking about this for years and years. Sorry, I know I'm like, I could just keep talking about it, so I'm just going to we'll save it for another time.
But you're right. We've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think that's part of why we're so passionate about it. And I think that's part of why we've started building the tools that we have. That's why speech markdown is there, because it started fitting some of the needs that a CMS would need, and that's why I built multivocal, because I started realizing there needed to be a better way to manage this content that was going to be sent back. And the pieces are starting to, you know, and that's why Leximic built what they built, because they had a need. They had clients that had content that it didn't make sense to keep coming back to the developer and changing. You know, so we're starting to see the pieces out there and coming together. I think we need to put it together.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it would be really fun to work on a project like this, because it would be something that I would use on all of my projects, and I think it would be very useful for lots of other people. So,
you know, if you have thoughts, I hope people come and share them, either in the comments or find us on Twitter or find us on LinkedIn. Let's have this conversation. Come to my office hours. Let's have this conversation. Let's schedule time at Voice Lunch and have this conversation, and start putting these kinds of tools together. So, yeah, we could talk about this one for hours, I think, Mark. I really do. But
I'm purposely not saying anything, because we'll keep talking. But
it's long. We're long. We're long. We're long on this one. So thank you for this discussion, Mark. I know I'm sure we're going to return to it again, because I think it's that important.
Yeah, and it's been a lot of fun, you know, bringing up things that we've thought about before and like kind of envision how it's going to go next. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ellen. Always enjoy having a conversation with you.
Yep. We'll pick this up another time on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, Ellen.
Take care, Mark. Have a good week.
All right. Bye-bye.